Hi, my name is Chelsea Reese. I am doing second language acquisition and assessment of linguistic minorities. SLA, second language acquisition, is the process by which people learn a language other than their native language. The assessment of linguistic minorities is to evaluate the language proficiency of the student, their academic achievement, and the needs for the students whose first language is not the dominant language that is being taught within the classroom. The importance of the two is understanding SLA and assessment really helps educators support diverse learners effectively, ensuring equitable access to education. So I put the image of universal design for learning here because UDL benefits ESL learners because it provides the multiple pathways for engaging with content, accessing information, demonstrating understanding, and then all of those things that fall within UDL, visuals, choices, fostering that independence, and which leads to higher motivation for students. So, what is second language acquisition? SLA, like I said, is the process of learning an additional language beyond your native language. So, it would be that first language learned outside of somebody's native language. It occurs in natural settings or through formal instruction, which I'll be talking about in the next slide. There's 5 stages, so the learners typically progress through these stages, starting with stage 1, which is pre-production. Stage 2 is early production. Stage 3 is speech emergence. Stage 4 is intermediate fluency. And then stage 5 is advanced fluency. So the stages reflect the gradual development in the language skills of the student. Within that first stage, the pre-production stage, there's very few oral skills, and nonverbal responses are something that you would see a lot of. So the pointing, the gesturing, nodding, they might be able to draw pictures. And by the end of the stage, they're going to know about 500 words. They can usually, what you'll see is students being able to observe, listen, locate, and match certain things. The second stage, the early production stage, they're going to be able to listen with greater understanding. By the end of this, they're going to know about 1,000 words, and they'll be able to name things, recall information, draw, list, potentially underline. That's what you'll be seeing in the second stage, that early production. Third stage, speech emergence, they're going to have better comprehension and able to produce simple sentences. By the end of this, they're going to know about 3,000 words, and they should be able to tell, describe, compare. The fourth stage, the intermediate fluency, you're going to see an increase in their levels of accuracy, an increase in their ability to express thoughts and feelings. By the end of this, they are going to know about 6,000 words, and they're going to be able to predict, express a lot of higher level cognitive abilities. The fifth stage, that advanced fluency, it would be comparable to a native speaker of the language. So the key theories within SLA that I took away when I was researching this was Dr. Stephen Krashen, his input hypothesis. So that suggests that you learn best when you are exposed to the language slightly above your current level. So you might be able to understand what's being talked about, but you can't necessarily respond to it, but you're building on your knowledge by that. And like I had said in the previous slide, there was the learning of this through the natural settings or more formal instruction. So that's the acquisition learners. They absorb words more naturally, whereas like when you think about it in the formal instruction, that learning piece, it involves more of a conscious study and a memorization. The social interaction theory is the meaningful interactions with others that support language development. So if you think about a student who's kind of within the first couple stages of this, the 5 stages, during school, they're surrounded by a lot of peers who do speak the native language. So they're constantly having that language, the support of the language development by everybody who is around them. The natural order hypothesis, you start by mastering basic vocab, simple sentence structures, and then you gradually learn more complex stuff. So you think about the first stage versus the fifth stage. One of the videos I watched, it talked about, or it compared it to a ladder. So the first stage is kind of like that first step of the ladder. And then as you're gradually increasing it by the end, you're at that fifth stage where you are comparable to a native speaker. And then there is the critical period hypothesis. So the age influences the ability to acquire language proficiently. What are some of the factors that can affect SLA? Like I had just said, the age of the learner. So younger learners often achieve better long-term proficiency than older learners. They may acquire language faster initially, but they're not going to keep the proficiency long-term like younger learners would. The motivation and attitude. So there's that intrinsic motivation that leads to more effective learning. And then there's a lot of cultural factors that actually influence motivation types as well. The first language influence, that transfer of the first language, the structures of the first language, your native language, can cause errors, but also facilitate learning. I think of it as in high school, if you're learning Spanish or French, and as you're initially learning it, you struggle a little bit because you're so used to the rules of your native language. And then you find certain things within learning the new language that does click and make sense because of your knowledge of your native language and the structures of that language. Exposure and practice. So there's that frequent, meaningful use of the second language and the enhanced acquisition. So when you are, once again, in a classroom or a community and you're surrounded by hearing the second language, you really start to pick up on a lot of that stuff and have the meaningful acquisition, which once again is the exposure of that. And then the cognitive abilities and learning environment, which is huge in any situation. Individual learners' differences and supportive context truly, truly matter. Everybody learns differently. That's the benefit of the universal design for learning too. I always go back and think about that because everybody does learn so differently. So it has a huge effect on SLA as well. So the importance of the assessment for linguistic minorities, really the biggest thing is being able to identify learners where their current language proficiency level is and being able to determine the appropriate instructional strategies and supports to instruct students and give them that equitable access to the curriculum, the resources, and making sure that they are being their progress is being monitored in the language acquisition process so that you can continuously find ways to support them within the classroom, and not only within the classroom, but working together as a team and being collaborative with not only school, but home, and finding all of the little ways to best support them, whether it's using visuals in the classroom, whether it's asking at home if they want visuals, seeing how much language, how much they're using their second language outside of being at school, like if they're going home and not being exposed to it all. It's really just important to really, really have a solid understanding of where these learners are at, and the assessment is the key to being able to do so. Within the assessments we're going to be looking at, we're going to see formative assessments, summative assessments, curriculum-based assessments, which we're all pretty familiar with at this point. The New York State identification test for English language learners. So New York State, because it is one of the bigger states, created their own testing for English language learners. So the purpose of this test is to assess in New York State, or to measure English proficiency of potential English language learners at initial enrollment. It determines their classification and their instructional placement. It's administered after the completion of the home language questionnaire, and it is informal interviews in English and in the home language. It's administered within 2 weeks of enrollment in a New York State school. New students entering New York State schools who have no prior L records or L records in the state, and they are not given to students transferring within New York State if prior records exist. If they cannot find the records, then they would have to redo it. The schools request secure test materials annually. It seems like from what I saw, they have to request a lot of this stuff in June. The results are reported as raw scores, scaled scores, and performance levels to guide placement and instruction. So once they take the initial test and they realize that they fall within one of these categories, there's entering, emerging, transitioning, expanding, and commanding. So very similar to those 5 stages. And the New York State English as a Second Language Achievement Test is a summative assessment. It annually assesses L's in grades K through 12 in New York State. Once again, this is only used within New York State. The importance is to provide important data on L's English language development for schools and the state. It ensures compliance with federal laws requiring annual assessments and monitoring. It determines the level of services L's receive. This I have found to be a little tricky because, especially for special education students, they're already getting pulled for so many services. So then on top of them being out of the classroom so often, based on which you fall in on the scale score. So if you are an entering L, you might be getting pulled for much longer than a transitioning L from the classroom, and it's daily. The services are provided daily for Ls. So the connection to the second language acquisition is that it supports the tailored instructional strategies based on the proficiency levels. And it helps track progress in English language development over time. So as I discussed, the assessments being super, super important for driving instruction to ensure equitable access for all of the diverse learners. The curriculum-based assessments are assessments that are formative, occurring regularly during the school year. It helps to monitor progress and show where students are and where they need to be. It helps to make informed decisions around instruction, as I continue to say. There's a couple examples in the pictures here, on the slide here. So other common assessment tools that are seen is the measure. It measures, or WIDA access for L's measures English language proficiency for English learners. It focuses on, just like New York State does, listening, speaking, reading, and writing skills. New York State does not use this. They are one of the few states, like I said, with a higher number of L learners who have created their own ELP test. So I gave an example below this for California, as it being another large state, also did something very similar. So theirs is the ELPAC, the California Specific English Proficiency Assessment. It is an example of another large state that created their own test. And then the informal assessments, which are those language samples, portfolios, teacher observations. For New York State, the accommodations for L's on state assessments, there's time extension. So schools may provide extra time. The New York State site specifies that it's based on principal's discretion. Content area, regents exams, separate testing location. L's can test individually or in small groups for a better environment. Writing in their home language is permitted for non-ELA exams. Schools handling scoring with translation assistance. So obviously, when you are assessing this, you're not assessing their knowledge of English. You want to assess their knowledge of the skill, the academic skill. So for this, when they're doing an ELA exam, a lot of the ELA exams that are being given are based on the second language. So that one, they really, from what I saw, especially in New York, or at least in New York State, will not allow them to do it in their native language, but other tests they can. So like math, um, some of the other content areas are allowed to do that. When they give the New York State English as a second language assessment test, that is a little different. So for that, only IEPs and 504 plan accommodations are allowed. So read aloud is permitted for students with disabilities if it is listed on their IEP only. A lot of those other things they can't do for that one because it's that annual test to see where the students fall. So if they aren't able to do it, they aren't able to do it. It's a different accommodation system than it is for Regents exams or other content areas. And the exemption, like I said, principals may exempt new grade 11 or 12 entrants from select Regents exams. They are allowed to do that. Former Ls eligible for accommodations for 2 years after proficiency. So if they are listed as being proficient in the language, they still can have those accommodations for those following 2 years. Some of the challenges in assessing linguistic minorities is that cultural bias in standardized tests, it can affect the fairness. So making sure that tests are valid, up to date, constantly being looked at through the state. Distinguishing between language proficiency and academic knowledge is difficult. Like I said, it's really not, you're not assessing for a lot of this what they, or how well their second language is. You really want to understand their academic knowledge. So being able to distinguish that sometimes can be difficult. And need for culturally responsive assessments. So some of the implications for educators, tailoring that instruction based on the assessment, like I've said several times, results or the assessment results to meet the individual needs, create inclusive classrooms that value and celebrate multilingualism, and engage in continuous professional development and on SLA and assessment strategies, and constantly advocating for resources and supports to benefit linguistic minority students. Assessment of linguistic minorities is critical for effective instruction and equity. There's obviously challenges that always exist, but can be addressed through best practice. SLA is a very complex developmental process influenced by multiple factors, and educators do play such a crucial key role in supporting diverse learners through understanding the application of SLA principles and really looking at those assessments. So yeah, thank you for watching.